xCloud's coming to the big screen in 2021. With the console launches, well, about 2 weeks behind us now, actually. It's kind of hard to believe that the Xbox Series X and S have been in your dirty little mitts for about 2 weeks now. Phil Spencer is doing yet another round of interviews, and in this interview that he did with The Verge, which you can find the links to jump to below, he talked a lot about some of the manufacturing, what's going on with xCloud, and honestly, it's worth a read if you really want to understand like some of the business side and just understand how he's thinking about pushing Xbox forward. And there are some notable tidbits that are definitely worth pointing out. First off, we're not going to bury the news here. He very explicitly mentioned that he expects an Xbox app on your TV, with an asterisk there, in 2021. He actually said in the next 12 months. Now, when this is coming from Phil Spencer, the head of the Xbox org, this is more so, I think, fact than it is a wish list. And Microsoft actually already has some really good relationships with TV manufacturers, specifically Samsung. They've already included Game Pass and xCloud and other Xbox apps on the latest Galaxy line of Samsung devices. And so it wouldn't behoove Microsoft to ink a deal with Samsung to say, hey, let's put an Xbox app on your TV. And that way, when you ship it, people can just enjoy their Xbox content. Now, there's a couple things here to think about. One, TVs today aren't really just glass with an image projected onto them. I mean, they are internet connected, Bluetooth enabled devices, which for xCloud, that's all you really need. And we've always known, and we've talked about here many times, how xCloud should be on the TV. And it looks like next year that is actually going to materialize according to Phil Spencer, because he said, hey, within 12 months, he expects this to happen. We've also got CES right around the corner. CES happens in early January, where there's always a lot of talk of the new TVs and all that stuff. So if they're going to be making an announcement, that doesn't seem like a bad time to really come out and say, hey, look, these TVs are going to have Xbox built in. Now, it's interesting to think about how is this actually going to materialize, because if you look at, say, like my LG OLED TV, there's an Apple TV app that has, I don't want to say a watered down experience, but it's a less fidelity experience than, say, an Apple TV. And I would be wondering if when you launch an Xbox app on a TV, are you going to get the full Xbox dashboard, or are they going to have a customized UI and experience for these devices? I would expect that it's probably the latter, because you're not going to need all the features and functionality that the Xbox currently offers. You're just going to be able to need to access probably your xCloud, maybe your friends list or something like that. I don't know. We will see messages. We'll see how they actually execute on that. But it looks like xCloud is finally going to be landing on your TV in 2021, which is a good thing. But the big question there is, what about existing devices? If you have a Samsung TV today, or like my LG C9, will I get an update to include that app? That we don't know yet. We still have a lot of details to understand about how that is going to be shaking out. But yeah. So there's a lot of details here in this interview. And so one of the other really, really interesting things that Phil Spencer pointed out is that the demographic that buys consoles for over the past 10 years hasn't really expanded from a volume perspective. He says you can't just fight over the same customers that we've seen every year. The average age of your customer goes up by 1 every year, because it is the exact same demographic that's just moving with you. Now, let me kind of break that up because it's out of context there. What he is saying is that the demographic of people that are buying Xbox consoles or PlayStation consoles or just consoles in general is moving along 1 year at a time. Now, that sounds like an obvious statement. It's like, hey, that demographic is getting 1 year older each year that passes. That seems logical. But what he's really saying here is that there's no younger people coming into the console market backfilling behind it, meaning it's not shifting it down, or staying stable. It's not like it's, hey, a 25-year-old is the average person that buys a console. Well, 5 years ago, it might have been 25-year-old. Now it's an average age of 30. What he's saying there is that the demographic of people who buying consoles is fixed. Like, there's a finite number, and Microsoft knows roughly how many people are actually going to buy consoles and how many they can potentially sell, which really puts into perspective things that they're talking about with xCloud. And in the interview and multiple times elsewhere throughout interviews, he talks about how there's billions of customers on smartphones. That's not new. That is pretty obvious. What he's kind of hinting at between the lines here is that if Microsoft truly wants to grow its gaming business, it needs to be gaming platforms on these mobile devices, because that's where the younger demographics are. That's where they can actually sell Game Pass beyond the console generation that they're currently selling to today, which is, again, why it's so important that they spend all these billions snatching up studios, because, again, they need that content pipeline, and they want to put it on your TVs, your phones, and everywhere else, and truly make it a first-class experience so that they can grow beyond the console gamer. That is a big deal for Microsoft, and kind of keep that theme in mind. Growing beyond the console gamer helps explain why they have such rich fidelity experiences on Xbox or on the iOS and Android apps, and they also allow game streaming. It's all about trying to bring their games and their platform, not just a console, to other end devices effectively at the end of the day. Now, to clear things up, people are going to read into that and say, well, he's clearly saying consoles are going away. And he very specifically addressed it here in this interview with The Verge and with many other publications. Every time he does that, he says, that's when streaming all comes together. Most people think all consoles will go away, or my local devices that play video games will go away. I'm not quite sold on that. I think there will be, I think we'll just have to be nimble and watch what the players want. So effectively what he's saying here is if the gamers demand that they want a console high-end performance device, that's what they're going to continue to do. Now, other interesting tidbits here. And there's some big things here. In the manufacturing side, like quite literally building the consoles, he acknowledged that Sony started building consoles before Microsoft, and they are going to probably have a sales lead right now because they started building consoles earlier. They're more in the market, and they can just sell more. Now, you wonder how they know that. Well, my guess here is that when they're talking to retailers and they say, hey, look, Best Buy, making up numbers here, you're going to get 1,000 consoles for North America, making that up. And they probably came and said, well, PlayStation's giving us 2,000. And he's like, well, that's all we got. But what he said here is that they were much later to mass manufacturing consoles. He said they started manufacturing late in summer because they were waiting for some specific AMD technology in their chip, which is more than likely, I'm guessing, RDNA full 2.0 is what I am guessing as to why they started manufacturing later. And they figured that for their first holiday and second holiday, which means Black Friday and Christmas, we would see more higher end SKUs. The Series X sold. No surprise there. Series X is clearly the dominant platform for Microsoft, and they want to get as many of those out there. But they expect more Series S's in the long term. One really interesting bit of information here about building the Series S. He says we can actually build more of the Series S chips in the same chip or the die space as we can the Series X, meaning the chip size or the CPU or system on a chip for the Series S is much smaller than that of the Series X. This is key. Why is this key? Because if you can fit more chips on a single die, that means you can get more consoles out of a single yield, which means that you can help keep that price lower, which also probably helps explain why they were able to hit the price point that they were. Granted, I do think that they are losing a little bit probably on that price point, but either way, the Series S is priced extremely well for what it is, and the fact that they can get more chips on a yield versus the Series X just means that it'll help them to further push that price down faster than, say, a Series X. And so there's a lot to digest through this this interview, and it talks a lot about his heritage of working. We all know that he started very on, I think it was in the mailroom, and now he leads the Xbox org, and this is just what he's extremely passionate about. But he does point out one thing that I think all of us can agree with, and he says that his least favorite part of the gaming industry are the extreme fanboys who are just attack the other, because he has a very real mindset that for Microsoft to win doesn't mean that Sony has to lose, and for Sony to win doesn't mean Microsoft has to lose. There's two primary targets right now. We know that Nintendo's out there, and we also know that Luna and Stadia, which he does talk about in this interview, he's not blind to them, all exist, but most people refer to in the console space, obviously Sony and Microsoft, in that there's enough room for both of these companies to coexist very healthily in the gaming industry. It's not a crazy thought. I mean, that's kind of what we've heard from him, and to hear him explicitly lay that out. He also talks about the differences of working under Bill Gates, under Satya Nadella and Steve Ballmer, and just at a high level. Bill Gates was a very detail-oriented, not in your face, but a very aggressive CEO for helping growth. Steve Ballmer was all focused on sales, and Satya Nadella is much more empathetic to the environment and the community, and a very good leader at the end of the day. So it was a good interview of Phil, and the things that we need to be watching out for now as we move into 2021 is, when do we get xCloud on iOS? We know that that's going to be coming via Safari. When do we get xCloud on the TV? movie. I think these are going to be huge monumental movements for Microsoft. And then again, continuing to watch the Game Pass growth, because Microsoft is investing heavily on Game Pass. Because if you read again between the lines of all the interview, he talks about how they need to grow Game Pass, and with these billions of mobile devices out there and those users not really connected to Xbox, especially on the younger demographic who are not accustomed to playing consoles on a game, this is so very important to the long-term health and stability of the Xbox platform, not just the Xbox consoles. And so there you go. That's a quick breakdown of the interview. The interview is about an hour or so long. Definitely worth a listen. And that's all we got for now.